Welcome to Smith Weekly Discussions, an occasional program for our members of Smith Weekly Research. Please note this program is a private discussion and everything contained herein is for entertainment and educational purposes only. With that, we hope you're in a comfortable position, along with your favorite beverage, to enjoy the discussion. We remind our audience to examine our show notes attached to each of our shows to better understand how our program functions. Before we get into our discussion, we want to say thanks for questions coming from our audience at Smith Weekly, including Jack T., Jared W., Dave V., and Mike P. We have a new guest on the program today. Mr. Matthew Mickleborough is with us. Matthew is the founder of Junior Resource Investing, a research and analysis service in the natural resource sector that provides various services to its membership. Junior Resource Investing is based in Saskatchewan, Canada, and you can learn more about Matthew and his work by looking at their website, juniorresourceinvesting.com. Matthew, thank you for joining us on the program. Welcome.
Glad to be here, Andrew. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you on the program and chat. And of course, first time on the program here, Matthew. How about we just kick it off with you telling us about your background and experience, and then also a little bit on the services you provide at Junior Resource Investing.
I guess I'd probably start off by saying that I would consider myself an outsider to this space, and I would probably hold that up. And if I'm going to start painting a theme already on the very first answer, that hold it up as maybe an advantage in what can be sometimes a pretty fraught with danger sort of sector. Self-taught. I've had a couple of careers prior to this. I was a carpenter, got a couple of degrees, teacher, a bit of a jack of all trade, master of none sort of thing. Probably I'd say 5-ish years ago at this point, I transitioned into active investing and not just kind of passive, letting my company pension do the work for me. And very quickly, I sort of gravitated towards, I've always had an interest in kind of the science and in geology, and very quickly sort of gravitated there. So JRI, Junior Resource Investing, what's on the box is in the box, fairly literal title. I dedicate myself full time to the resource sector, not to kind of get off in the weeds right away here, but I'm generally wary of people who, the talking heads and the gurus who are experts at, the pharma companies and weed stocks and resource codes, AI stocks. I kind of understand how intensely complicated mining and exploration is as a sector, and I have to assume that those other ones are as well. Not disparaging. I'm sure there are some, people more clever than I and more experienced than I who can pull it off. But I just think that, for me, I just think it's important to pick your niche and focus intensely on that, right? So JRI itself, yeah, I consider myself, I guess, yeah, kind of as you referenced, a one-man analytical firm, right? I pride myself on my research, and I pride myself on my capacity to kind of do the intense and sometimes intensely boring work that goes into being informed in this sector, and I try to create products or content that is at the same time informed but also accessible, I guess, right, for my listeners and for my viewers and my readers.
Yeah, Matthew, lots of stuff to unpack with what you said, and I certainly appreciate a lot of your comments there. And it's a pile of work. I don't understand how you have, people, as you say, that proclaim to be themselves experts. They cover all these different areas, and you and I both know that there's barely enough time in the day, even at a 16 or 18-hour day, at that matter, to be able to sort out and get good traction with respect to the work. And there's so much work, whether you're talking about an individual company analysis or your underlying commodity analysis on the S&D side and the various catalysts that could provide success for those juniors that are in the business, exploration versus other stage companies, developers, producers, and all the other things in between. So it's super difficult to be able to get that together. And when we have a membership of some form or some type of a model that goes with that, it's also a balancing act with respect to that as well, because you have so many different things that come at you that are unexpected and all these things that have to be satisfied on the customer service front. And as you said, one man firm with maybe some assistant of some kind and possibly some consultants to help you out with some of the other things that maybe we're not experts on, like software and technology and these things that
Mhm.
help us kind of speed up and optimize our schedule and our resources on a daily basis. So really appreciate all the comments there. And how do you approach generally now, Matthew? And I know this is a long-winded open box here, but in terms of the broader sector understanding with respect to the underlying commodity that may be subject of the analysis, but then also the specific company evaluation. Because often, unless there's some tremendous discovery success at the drill bit, these things are often closely coupled together, the underlying commodity and of course the specific junior that we may be evaluating.
Well, yeah, I guess maybe just to touch on your comment there, and I'll do my best. I'm usually the interviewer, so I'll do my best to provide answers rather than questions here. Yeah, I mean the thing is, and the issue is that as you no doubt know too, as a kind of a content creator, a lot of different plates to keep in the air, a lot of different hats you have to wear, and I just think again that the more that I can focus on research and learning. I come at this with zero ego, right? Again, I'm not a self-proclaimed guru. You don't find me on Twitter kind of crowing about the things that I've always done right and kind of pretending my mistakes, right? That the more time that I can actually spend focused on just research and learning and improving my own craft, theoretically, the better that is, right? But I guess if this is to answer your question, let me know if I'm kind of half a step off base, but I'm very intensely sort of bottom up, right? I guess you might say kind of like the groundhog. Every once in a while, I'll kind of stick my head above ground and take a look at the macro. But for me, because it's specifically in the commodities, right? I mean, we know about the cyclical nature of it, right? And the super cycles. And we also know, and I'm sure that you and your audience don't need to be lectured on this, but just the exploration deficit that seem to be chronic across almost the entire sector, right? Whether you're talking, from iron to nickel to uranium to whatever, right? I mean, there's just been an absolute dearth of exploration dollars going into it. That for me, it's relatively, I don't want to say easy, but I just think that if you can just have the patience and the nimbleness to enter the correct positions at the correct time, that this is a glorious moment, I guess, in terms of cyclicality for people, that you kind of can almost pick your thematic of your own choice, right? And so for me, and that's even setting aside, geopolitical kind of tensions that we see rising. And I don't mean to be a pessimist, but I don't see a meaningful solutions to those, right? And so as the West continues to realize that, holy crap, China has spent the last generation cornering the market on, A to Z. I'm Canadian, so A to Z, cornering the market on commodities. That suddenly, we're behind the game here, and that need to onshore in friendly Western or Northern jurisdictions. I think people and governments and organizations are finally starting to recognize there's a serious need to rectify that, right? And so for me, intensely bottom up, like I say, I have my own thesis with which I'm kind of playing, and that's, I just maybe briefly explained, right? But for me, it's all about, I mean, I enjoy the hunt of 4,000, 6,000, how many there are publicly traded resource companies. Probably you can throw out 80% of them as junk or lifestyle or moose pasture sort of thing, winging a prayer. But it's kind of the thrill of the hunt that I really actually quite enjoy, and that sort of iterative process of filtering through these companies. I think maybe I'll stop there and let you ask follow-ups in terms of if you're asking about process or specific details I look for.
Again, just appreciate some of your comments with how this goes, and couldn't agree more. There's so many shit codes out there, if we can use that term here. Of course, it's my program, so I can say what I want, and you know, and we've all made our mistakes. Look, we have to happily admit that. I mean, people that sit out there on Twitter and only look after their own book, or sit there and
Mm-hmm.
always talk about their big wins, but they never talked about their losses and stuff. I mean, you have to be humble in this sector. You really
Mm-hmm.
do. Otherwise, I mean, unless you're making all your money off of, fees to talk your book, I guess you have to be humble. And I think that's one of the things that we can appreciate and have learned in our experience. I think I'm just speaking for both of us here that, we just don't take that type of approach. And, we've all made mistakes and we've all got suckered. All of us, we've all been suckered into some company that didn't turn out to be what it was promised. Of course, when you have, as you said, when you could throw 80 to 90% of them in the trash can or in the toilet, it's hard not to get caught with that kind of statistic at some point in this sector and experience. So really appreciate that. But yeah, if you don't mind sharing a little bit of how your secret sauce works a little bit here, because analyticals in this business can be so varied, of course, and there's certain things we have to look for that I think form up part of the Venn diagram. As far as how you look at maybe some of these analysis, once you've decided maybe that the underlying commodities fits for a different reason, whether it's S&D, whether it's sentiment, whether it's different components on the bigger macro, When you come into the micro side of it and you look at these specific vehicles as to how you take advantage of your bigger macro thesis, company evaluation specifically, there's obviously some geotechnical information here that's going to play into analysis across the board for the most part, depending on what you're dealing with. But maybe I'll start it with having you give comments about the management team part of the accounting work that we do that go into this evaluation. What do you think is important on this component of the evaluation? Because I think management team is very important, a serious component here.
Yeah, well, and you know what? I think that's you kind of hit the nail on the head in terms of where I start, right? I mean, I filter through, and the ones that catch my eye are the ones I follow up on. And this is maybe I'll take us half a step back, and I think that part of my vision, or my call to arms, as it were, is that I want retail to be better informed and better at researching themselves. And I recognize it doesn't mean not necessarily everybody is going to sit down and read a 357-page PFS, which not to won't try to pat myself on the back, but that's kind of currently what I'm grinding through right now. I mean, that's a big part of my job, and is that kept. I mean, I have that capacity for and patience to do that sort of boring and very iterative and reiterative process of research, right? And so for me, and this is maybe something that I was surprised by as a relative newcomer, like I say, just kind of 5 years into this, is that a lot of, and I almost, like I say, feel kind of, I feel defensive or protective a little bit, kind of mother henning here, maybe kind of silly way to put it, but that a lot of retail investors make bad choices and they don't even realize it until it's too late, right? And then they don't learn from that. But I mean, for me, a big part, talk to management. I guess that's kind of where I'm going with this, is that people don't even, why are you putting money into a company if you haven't even picked up the phone to talk to the CEO, right? I mean, this is, you kind of, you mentioned Bill Gates. This is not Tesla. This is not Microsoft. This is not some multi-billion-dollar transnational corporation that's faceless and impossible to get through 18 levels of middle management. These junior companies. I mean, these the CEO. This is their passion project, right? Key man kind of thing, right? So, or key person, and so they want to talk shop. They want to talk about their project because this is their life's work, and kind of shocks and appalls me that people don't talk to CEOs and don't pick up the phone and reach out to these guys and these people, right? And so for me, management is number one. I'm not a geologist. I do my best, self-taught, advanced layman kind of thing, whatever you want to say, and I do my best. But I mean, I very quickly realize when I'm talking to actual geologists that I am not a geologist, right? And so I can't critique from that angle on a meaningful enough level to have that mastery required to understand those things. And so for me, I have to understand sort of the filter or the bottleneck that those things pass through, which is management, right? And which is the executive and the technical team. And so for me, it is a people's industry, right? And for me, I'll preface this by saying there are good people doing good work, absolutely, right? I mean, for on the analytical side, people such as yourself, but on companies too, there are a lot of good people doing a lot of good work. But there are also a lot of shysters and self-interested sociopaths and kind of lizards in suits sort of thing that have they'll smile while they slit your throat sort of thing, right? Smile and shake your hand and ask how your mother is by her name while they steal your wallet out your back pocket, right? And so it's such a personality driven industry that if you can't talk to these people and your bullshit detector, now that you've sworn, I'll throw mine in too, right? I'll lead the way on that one with you, but I'll let you lead the way there. But that if you don't have a good bullshit detector, you've got to be careful. And I think that maybe is one of my skills, is that I trust my instincts with when I talk to these guys, right? I mean, is it a lifestyle company? I mean, there's a few different categories that you can kind of stick these management groups in, right? Is it that they're self-interested but successful, self-interested and unsuccessful, that they'll make you money or they won't make you money, or they'll make themselves money either way, right? And then that holy grail is people that are actually just trying to do good science, do things the right way, and pursue discovery, exploration, and development kind of in the right fashion. So for management, I mean, it's qualitative and it's kind of fuzzy and ill-defined, but just talk to them and get a sense of who they are, right? I mean, in more definitive and more kind of quantitative, I would say. I mean, get into their G&A, and how much are they paying themselves? I mean, those, and even get careful. Those how often have you seen, Andrew, that they pay themselves a small salary, and so they crow on that, but then you look into the details, and there's a $300,000 loan to that executive officer, and it's being paid at 60% interest or something ridiculous, right? And so it's such a shell game, because I think they recognize, like, a true sociopath, and I say that somewhat seriously, right? That true sociopaths know how to not look like sociopaths, right? And that's the issue that you have in this space sometimes, is that these guys know how to play the game too, these bad actors. And so you got to dig in. You got to dig into G&A. You got to dig into company finances. You got to dig into M&A. You got to dig into every piece of information they can possibly provide for you, because once if they pass the sniff test verbally in those conversations, and have more than one, stick them, ask them tough questions, find difficult things, and see how they respond, right? And I think it's Rick Rule who can be divisive sometimes, and here I am, an ant talking about Rick Rule and complaining about him, but even I would sometimes distrust his approach. But he makes some advice that I took once, and it resonates: is ask them questions, difficult questions you know the answer to, and see how they do, right? And do they come up front and answer it boldly and bluntly and truthfully, or do they waffle and bullshit, right? And understand that, yeah, this is a person industry, a people-led industry, an intensely human industry, even though it is geological, and it kind of begin, yeah. So it begins and ends there in terms of how I judge people. Not ends, but very much it begins by judging the team itself, and if I can actually trust them with my money.
A lot of the things you said are just straight on, and the candidness is so refreshing and appreciated, Matthew, with respect to these things, because you and I, we get calls, we have people that want to talk to us, and we have financings that are constantly offered, and all these things, and it's great because we're well known, but at the same time, it's also an exercise of time and resources, and how much time you really want to spend on this. And then at one point, is it worth me even dealing with getting the checkbook out of the back file cabinet? Or let's pass and move on, right? And you're right. The other thing about this sector, as you said, is first of all, you have to be able to backfill some of those areas. So there's a lot of people out there that claim to know everything. Oh, I got the engineering down. I got the metallurgy down. I've got yeah, the geology, no problem. This looks good. Got that sorted out. Got the mining engineer. Got the back end processing sorted out here. Oh yeah, capital markets, no problem. All these things that go into this. And the reality is there's no way we can cover all this. Yes, there's good leaders, and typically the good leaders, or in our cases here, we backfill some of those areas that we're weak in by our network and by having other good people who can provide those inputs that we may not be able to provide ourselves. And it's absolutely true. I mean, I'm not a mining engineer. My professional degree, if it even matters, and I really don't think it does too much, because it was more about parties and paying tuition to understand how to live life, really. But my
Yeah.
background is simply a business degree with some history and some political foreign policy side ventures that I did in college. And, obviously I learned things like, how to be reasonably responsible. But of course, I paid for that back in those days. But the other part too is that it's a sector that you can generally pick up the phone and talk to people most of the time. It's going to take some efforts for sure, extra efforts, depending on who you're wanting to talk to. And you talked about all the different categories of those folks who have been successful, have not been successful, and as a result of their success have maybe changed how they approach their models and how they see value for shareholders versus when they were hungry and lean and hadn't had that success
Hmm.
beforehand. And then, of
Yep.
course, age plays into it. And so there's all those other things. You see geos and different people with a name renting themselves out to everybody in the sector these days. And in some cases, we've seen that. And so there's lots of pieces there. But the other thing is, as well, that you're right. You can't call, you know, the CEO of Disney or Microsoft or Tesla and have a conversation about their equity valuation, or Nvidia, or any of these. And some of the ones I mentioned, I would never care to talk to, um, because I just don't like some of them. Besides that personal misgiving, at least in this sector, you can generally do some heavy lifting and do some different work and talk to these people and sort out who is who, and what's worth looking at and maybe who is not. And I think that's the unique part of it, because generally in most equity markets that are public, you can't have those conversations. And so I think that's another interesting part about this sector. Overall, I think those are some of the things that I think are important. And you mentioned Rick Rule. I never personally spoken to him. I think we exchanged an email as a result of a mutual friend introduction many years ago, and unfortunately, nothing facilitated in terms of a conversation. happy to leave it. I really just don't care. For me, it's just like you. It's, we will pick and choose as we want, and we'll go about our work. And if there happens to be a crossing of paths, so be it. Not going to bend over, if you know what I mean.
Mhm.
So, so much work to do, I guess, and lots of ways, of course, to approach this as well. Maybe we'll kick that off further here with maybe any comments that I might have said that you want to come back and follow up on. And then also, are there any particular areas of the junior markets today, Matthew, of interest right now to you that you've done some work on? You've delved into it a bit that you care to mention. And of course, talking on high level stuff here, but also maybe, and we don't need any specific names at all, and that's perfectly up to you, but perhaps a specific idea or two for our audience to start their own due diligence on. What are your thoughts there?
Mm. Well, yeah, I mean, I not to belabor it too much, but I think I always go back to a Mark Twain quote. Is it a gold mine is a hole in the ground with a liar at the top, or something like that, right? I think that you need to be cynical in this industry because if you're not, you're going to lose your shirt. Lots of shady things happen. I think I'm kind of wandering from your topic. I'll get back to it if you give me a second, right? And that's what I've learned as I've come through this more and more. And I'll preface this actually, or I'll add to this by saying that I also wear the hat. I'm investor relations business development for Fathom Nickel. I'm a Saskatchewan boy, stubble jumper, kind of halfway between the two hell zones of the Vulture and Vancouver and Toronto. And so, I mean, just being on the other side of that lens, right, and kind of being behind the veil has really also shown me just how shady a lot of this industry is in multiple fronts, right? I mean, bot accounts on Twitter and I mean BOUGHT and bot BOT, right? I mean both, right? That just I almost feel like a lot of the content that you see on a daily basis is fabricated. It's not a real person behind there with real ideas that they are 100% just hiding that they have been bought and paid for before they ever even got to you to parrot this content. Not to like I say, I'm kind of getting distracted, but I think because I think that's a huge part for me, right? I mean, I guess I'll preface this by saying that part of my business model is I get paid by companies, and I'm upfront about that, right? And I, like you say, I wear my mistakes. Sometimes I get paid by companies, and the ones that kind of pass across my interviews are a little bit more agnostic for me, but the ones that I kind of choose to be my clients, I take great care in picking people that I trust to work with, right? And people and that I say that because I want to demonstrate, and it's important to me that people understand my model, and then how that's part of how I'm monetized, and that's not something I hide. I don't hide from that. That's an upfront thing. People know that it's a thing that I talk about all the time, right? Because I think that you just have to understand, like you said, I mean, that yeah, this is not Bill Gates or yay Kanye West or these people that line up. You pay Barack Obama $1 million to come speak for you. That the fact of the matter is that in the junior resource sector, it's paid content. Everything you see, everything 99% of what you see is paid content, right? And I think just that people have to understand that it doesn't have to be, and this is where I come. I mean, it doesn't have to be a bad thing. Can be, often is, but it doesn't have to be, right? And it's just the matter of equipping yourself and weaponizing yourself to understand these things. I mean, every single analytical research report you read is paid content in this sector, right? I mean, TD Bank is not going to cover a $25 million market cap company, right? It's not how it works. And so PI Financial is one I'll stick out as a company that I like their work. I think they do good work. They're that they're some. I've spoken to some of their analysts, their base metal analyst, and I drive what he does. It's paid content, right? And so it's being aware of these things, right? And don't be naive and be kind of fleeced in the process. In terms of it's to circle back to what you actually asked me. I'll get off my soapbox here, I guess, and I try not to outsmart myself in terms of commodities, right? Like I don't think you need to go to these super niche and opaque and difficult to understand sort of sectors or industries or like tellurium or scandium stuff like that, right? Or vanadium where like the market is maybe difficult to understand, and it's kind of there's not an open spot price and all this kind of stuff, right? Where I don't think you need to do that at this time period. I mean, again, a part of my thesis is that we are at this cyclical secular bottom, and I think we've seen gold price up off the mat, right? And I will be a talking head guru and crow that my one good win was I called the bottom back in October for gold price, and I said that I kind of phrased it that I mean, you're seeing real damage being done to companies here, right? Where good companies with good projects, not barn burners, but can't raise money. And if you talk about that sort of destruction as being a sign of the bottom, and even you kind of more qualitative, seeing bull boards kind of being ghost towns where for previous years of the bear market there was still a lot of activity. And so I will be a guru right now, talking head. Here I am, so smart, right? And I'll follow this up with 10 examples of mistakes I made too, just to balance it off. But I think we are seeing a bit of a turn in terms of sentiment and in terms of the price, obviously, right? So yeah, my point though is that you don't outsmart yourself. You don't have to pick super complex. No one else goes here. No one else understands this. I don't think you have to do that right now to make good money, so long as you pick smart companies within those sectors. And so for me, I mean, it's pretty generic. I mean, I think gold's a good pick if you can find the right company right now. Especially kind of a near-term producer. That's a version of that I think is exciting, or a really good discovery story as maybe the bulls come back. I mean, copper. Zinc, I think, is a big one too. I think a lot of the base metals people avoid. I mean, I did a deep dive on steel, and I mean, I know that even steel's lost its bloom here the last few months, but or iron, pardon me, and I don't think that that base metals sometimes get overlooked in terms of that, because they aren't, it's not sexy, it's not gold, it's not bonanza grade, right? I mean, I work for Fathom Nickel. Nickel, even, I think, I mean, just you talk about the pendulum swing of sentiment, and the euphoria. The moment you feel euphoria, you should be selling or de-risking. And at the same time, I mean, the rumors of, I think this is Mark Twain again, but rumors of Nickel's death have been greatly exaggerated, right? I think that you look at the HPAL processors in Indonesia, and they are. I mean, it's going to be kind of an OPEC for nickel that they are absolutely developing, and I mean, they're flooding the market, cutting out competition, and they'll replace it with cheap, absolutely environmentally catastrophic nickel from their HPAL, right? Able to upgrade laterite to class 1 nickel, battery grade nickel, right? Which previously was practically impossible, now possible, but at extremely energy intensive moments. I myself, maybe that's where I am the loneliest and most contrarian, and that's part that I do agree with. I think that's a Rick Ruleism too. Is you have to be a contrarian in this sector to make money, and you have to be prepared to be lonely for a while. I think that if people aren't that geopolitical thesis I referenced about the West having to kind of nut up or shut up in terms of their approach to critical minerals, part of why I remain bullish on domestic Western North American nickel. But that one admittedly is less obvious at the moment. So I think, if to answer your question, gold, zinc, copper, yeah, you don't have to get fancy, I guess, is my point. Oh, and do you
Yeah.
want me to talk about companies too, or should I kind of take a breather and let you get in there?
Take a breather for a moment. I appreciate that. Those good comments. Unfortunately, can't take notes quick enough to respond to everything, Matthew. But first of all, zero interest in paying Mr. Gates or Mr. Obama for anything. But how people look up to some of these folks, to me at my age, is actually funny. Look, I know they've all been successful, and we've been all been successful in our own right, but I also don't have the desire to do some of the things that those people have done. But I don't look up to them. They're human beings, and they've had just as much opportunity in this world as we have, just with respect to how we view the world and how we want to proceed with our own lives. And everybody has different directions. On the analyst side of things, yeah, I appreciate your comments there because, as you know, when you dig into these things, while some of these analysts hold themselves out to be like an independent division of the larger institution that they represent, the big equity financing that the banking side just did has nothing to do with the coincidental nature of the fact that we just also added coverage to that transaction.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Of course, some of them like hold themselves out like they're too good for it, right? You contact some of these analysts and generally clueless, and you can sort it out by if you do talk to some of them. Some of them actually do good work. Some of them are just absolutely so vague and macro generalized that you almost have to just kind of scratch your head too. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's just funny how they've been able to hold out kind of that structure, if you will. For us trying to get a grasp on S&D of a particular underlying and all the different parts that go into this. As you well know, we've spent a number of years now in uranium, and when we started out, we really didn't understand any of it. And today, it's almost like it's such an easy sector to understand But that's coming from someone who has spent a lot of time over the last 8 years, roughly, looking at that sector. And so it's easy for me to say now that is all fairly straightforward stuff, but for a new person, it can be quite complex. And when you dig into fuel cycle, you really start to lose it unless you're willing to spend the time to figure it out. And of course, talk to the people who know about it to help you kind of speed up your process. But I agree. I think sentiment, certain sectors are certainly perking up, and there is opportunity, like you said, if you spend enough time on specific company analysis, that there is opportunity, irrespective of the underlying, to have
Mhm.
success if that company's doing the right things. And so that's also another point. I mean, there are many ways to skin a cat, as they say, or to kill a chicken. And you can definitely understand that for sure as far as that approach. But feel free. I mean, if there is anything specific on nickel that you found compelling that's on the S&D side, or maybe an equity, or maybe something else, another commodity area that you're looking at, Matthew, by all means.
Well, I just wanted to pick up. You talk about uranium, and I think that's a good example. If I'm trying to help people understand, who I am. I mean, it's funny for me because I miss the uranium bull market, and it's not because I wasn't bullish on uranium. I mean, I go back, God, I'm closer to 40 than I am to 30, which kind of scares me and kind of gives me chills. That I think I'm still a young punk sometimes. Maybe I am to some people, but that going back for 15, 20 years of my life, I recognize, uranium's the future. If we're serious about decarbonization, if we're serious about this energy transition, nothing comes close. There's nothing else that has the energy density required. And I say this as a guy, I'm pro reasonable, responsible energy transition. Sometimes I think that's kind of a four-letter word in this sector, and I wish it wasn't. We can talk about that later if you want. But I think that's an admirable, if done correctly, goal, and nothing else works besides uranium. And so for me, I kind of laugh because as a private citizen, so to speak, I've been bullish and thumping the barrel about uranium for 15 years. But as I transitioned into this, this is now my full-time gig, right? And I kind of live, breathe, and eat this sector. Eat, yeah. Anyway, I never, I don't, I never, I had uranium is its own kind of strange little duck, right? And I take seriously my ability to understand and be informed and actually comprehend what's in front of me. And uranium being kind of its own little thing, I never understood it well enough to make individual picks. In hindsight, should I have just bought exposure to the commodity? Should I have just bought the major somehow? Probably I should have, right? But that I because I wasn't comfortable critically assessing, meaningfully assessing those companies, I missed the boat. And so, I mean, kudos to you. I mean, yeah, like you say, you probably understand too, right? How to be a true contrarian means you're going to be lonely sometimes. And, being early and being patient is so critical. But yeah, I mean, uranium is such a good example for me of I try to take it seriously, knowing what I don't know. And so for me, even though just kind of one of those things where I try not to get FOMO about missed opportunities, but that's one where I kind of slap my forehead that I called my shot and then didn't do anything with it. Um, Individual company. This is one that I was actually debating whether I was going to do this or not, but I just think that, like, I get excited talking about companies. I mean, if you don't, I don't know why you're in the sector, right? Why are you actively picking individual companies, individual tickers if you're not, right? And so I think I got a couple here. Maybe I'll rant and ramble about here. I mean, and I'll tell you if they're kind of a client of mine or not. But and I'll give one here that's kind of iffy because it looks like they've got a heck of a project. And they are super torquey as silver kind of gets up off the mat, and silver being kind of the degenerate little brother of gold, right? The equity metals, EQTY.V, they respond very, very healthily to upward mobility in the silver spot price. They're polymet, but clean-ish polymet, right? I mean, they only have two streams. They get 90% recovery on all four of their silver, copper, zinc, lead. They're in BC. I'm a bit of a jurisdictional junkie too, where most of my picks I try to stay in tier one. Yes, there are permitting issues and First Nations or Indigenous kind of stressors that happen sometimes, but I'd rather that versus oops, now you're nationalized, that you can kind of see in other countries. But yeah, equity metals, polymet silver, very high grade. They have that kind of historical exploration back in the 80s where they hit high grade veins, never followed up on it. Super torquey, and so I kind of got in. I think I was in at 11 and a half or 12 and a half cents is my average. They flirted with 24 or more yesterday. It's been a bit of a sell-off here today, April 5th. But the reason why I'm cautious, and when I actually was debating bringing them up, because I feel a little spiteful, but they don't return my phone calls. And so I guess for me, I'm not even trying to pitch, hey, come on my show. I'm phoning them as an investor where I have a decent sized, more than a starter position, a couple of tranches purchased, and enough that I need to be talking to these guys. And I get ghosted, and then I had a phone call scheduled, and he didn't show up, and then he emailed me 3 hours later saying, sorry, well, I'll phone you tomorrow. And well, tomorrow was yesterday. You haven't heard from this guy, right? So kind of frustrating. I mean, if you're a pre-revenue company, you should be. This is my perspective, and part of my kind of filter with these companies is that if you can't return my phone call and you're pre-revenue and you live and die by investor relations and keeping investors happy, then why am I wasting my time with you, right? So that one's kind of there's something. Yeah, there's more to it there. Their corporate structure is not what I'm normally used to in this sector, but so far so good though in terms of 80 million silver ounces. They're aiming for 125 this year. Their new resource coming out, and super torquey, right? You want to see those companies that actually do respond to rising spot price, and they certainly have been, right? That's the whole point. Why don't you just buy exposure to silver? Because you want that leverage. And so those, yeah, they're absolutely leveraged. So that there's one, not a client. Thyroid Metals. I think that you talk about. I think they're 100 million market cap right now, but Brandon McDonald is one of the most sincere and trustworthy CEOs I've come across in this industry. I'm not sure if you're familiar with these guys or not, but they're zinc and tungsten in Yukon, and they are best in class, right? If you're looking at how to assess different projects, you got your $5 million market cap company trying to scrabble together 500,000 ounces of gold that it's going to be a struggle for anybody to care about them sometimes. I think sometimes there's value, and there's always exceptions, but I think that typically you should be trying to find best in class path towards, it's always a wing and a prayer, and it's always hope, and it's always driven on what the what could be's and the what ifs, but trying to find best in class projects. And so for me, Fireweed Metals, I mean, they have best in class CEO. Their geological team is absolutely tier one, second to none, and their projects are also Mac Pass, Mac Tongue, are also world class. And I think that part of that issue is that the market just isn't sure how to value them yet. But you've got majors on board like the Lundins have bought in, right, and so they have a very serious kind of backing, which again is if you don't do geology, follow smart people with success is a not perfect, not bulletproof, but useful mechanism. So yeah, Fiery Metals, not a client. I've had Brandon on a couple of times and would love to have them as a client, but they aren't currently. And then the last one that I'll talk here is this one is a client, and I'm excited. They're kind of a feather in my cap, I guess you could say, is Founders Metals. Fireweed is FWZ.V as a ticker. Founders Metals is the last one here I'll talk about, and it's FDR.V. And they're just well, yeah, again, it's such a people's industry. Colin Paget is their CEO. He's a young gun. Brandon McDonald's a young gun too, right? And they don't have their big discovery that they can get fat and pigs at the trough, like you kind of referenced earlier, and then kind of lose their drive. Colin Paget, super smart guy, super sharp, like very by the book, very driven and hungry. And he wants to conduct best practice, and I really appreciate that about him. Antino Gold Project in Suriname makes me a little leery, right? I frankly didn't know anything about it, never even looked at it, right? But it's part of that kind of that rift system that separates Africa from South America, and so for the same reason why the Ivory Coast has millions of ounces of gold, so too does Suriname and Guyana and those other countries too. But just that's what this is going to be me calling my shot here a bit, but it's just one of those. It's a special project. It just every surprise is to the upside. They were looking for bulk tonnage a couple of weeks ago. They were going to release assays on what they were anticipating was going to be a bulk tonnage project, and they pulled out what was it, 10 meters of 30 grams per ton gold, right? And so it's just one of those projects that just they can't, they can't. They've got three or four. It's been legally artisanally mined for decades, and there's three or four of these different areas in the Amazon. I'm leaving on the 11th here in 6 days. I'm leaving to go down there for a site visit and do some video work. I'm super excited for it. But just every surprise it's the upside. They can't even get off their first target. It's just one of the ones that I talk about, and I read about it more and more, and it just kind of gives me shivers. I mean, a clear pathway to millions and millions of ounces of gold, high grade gold, even as a kicker, kind of a funny little aside, but they even still have from this legacy mining that occurred, they've probably got 2.5 million ounces of gold in tailings because it was all just kind of gravity float and 30% recovery, 40% recovery. So they have millions of ounces of gold in tailings that they have ownership over, and so managing the float and managing dilution and maintaining investor value is huge, right? And so I mean, they there's a clear path to non-dilutive financing just by selling the rights to that giant pile of gold. It's not even their primary project, right? And so just lots of cool little things about this story. Super smart. Pascal, their geo is a super sharp guy. Yeah, those are I think those are probably the three I'll begin and end with. There's others too, of course, because you can tell I'm getting a little ramped up. I like to talk shop here with this stuff, but no, I think I'll end there. Those are my three.
Thank you, Matthew, for that. It's good homework for the audience to check on and go do a little bit of their own work on maybe some preliminary due diligence on those things you mentioned there. And of course, maybe even check out some of the stuff that you've already put together. Generally, with some of the things that you said, again, going back to some other comments, I think, first of all, folks have to realize too, for this is for the audience, that you have to understand that our program. I'll pick on our program. I don't need to pick on anybody else. I do
Mm-hmm.
enough of that already, but I'll pick on our program and say it's meant to be a low level due diligence tool. That's what it is. And
Mm-hmm.
just because we have a guest on our program doesn't mean that like it's some kind of acceptance or approval. It's
Mm-hmm.
none of that. And I can't believe to some degree if you had to say this, but people think sometimes that just because we have a guest on our program that somehow our program is bad or oh well this company's no good. We're not here to tell the guests that they're no good. We're here to just hear them out, listen, ask some questions. Sometimes there's some tough questions. Obviously, time and resources matters to us, and so we're not able to cover everything. And there's almost like to some groups that there's a expectation that you're supposed to ask all the questions that they had in their mind. Well, remember, our desk in our office is different from yours, and what we do on a daily basis may not merit those things all the time. But the point is you have to understand that this is a low level piece of due diligence that people might do, and it's a service. You talked about talking to these companies. Well, we're trying to facilitate talking to some of those companies to where some of
Mm-hmm.
these other folks that are maybe a doctor or a lawyer that have their full day job can't do every day. This is a piece that allows you, maybe they give out their personal email address on the end of the call, these types of things where there's an opportunity to have a separate conversation. All we're doing is we're facilitating low level due diligence, getting to understand the personality and the responses and the vibes of these folks that come on our program. And people need to understand that. It's not like we're here to do anything more than that. I mean, our program is very vague. I mean, we don't even have introduction music, Matthew. I mean, who wants to listen to Smith Weekly discussions? It's such a boring program. That's a couple things that I would say there. And then just with respect to some of the folks that you may have talked to for a period of time and then they don't return your call and they stop talking to you or what have you, it's funny. You're absolutely right. It's appalling to me. And I don't even keep calendars. I don't use a calendar system. I literally still have a written schedule, either typed or handwritten. I don't use calendars. And it's amazing, even with the technology that is available for people who want to do that, that they can't even remember that they said they'd call you back and they don't. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, that to me is there are limitations to these things, and I think there's certain standards to that, at least personally, that you and I would accept as a reasonable business practice and professionalism. That in itself is just a good indicator of, hey, is this guy truly busy working 24/7? Or is he just pushing me off because he doesn't give a crap? And, most of the time it's the latter. That's the other part that I think is interesting too, because they can't even manage their own calendar or their own schedule. It is just ridiculous. And you and I probably don't even use some of those productivity things where we're still relying on, I'll use the chalkboard analogy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So it's hilarious. And you and I aren't necessarily that old yet. We're certainly getting down there. But anyway, so that was another piece. With respect to costs, I mean, you expect us with our model, with the model that we use at Smith Weekly, you expect us to somehow just keep putting out our money and capital and resources into these programs that cost us money. There's the podcast processing. There is the distribution platforms that have a fee. There's the technology, the converters, and these other things that cost money. There's time. my time. I don't even want to begin to quantify that. Obviously, we have costs and we have to cover our costs because our model's not like we have a subscription model where our members are paying us for this stuff every month. That's not how it works. So obviously, we have to charge for our costs. There's things called reimbursement and cost versus price. That's a whole other factor. And so I think people have to keep that stuff in mind too. It's not that we have a particular opinion of a guest on a program. It's just that we have costs irrespective of our opinion. That's one of the other things that I think sometimes people fail to see, or they're not asking the right questions. That's not what I would ask. Well, I don't have a panel of 10 people here proposing these questions. We ask for questions and you provide them if you want to put forth the time. But we're not able to do this all the time with our small staff, our consultants who get paid for other things, other expertise. And so that's part of how this all works. And I think people have to keep that in perspective. And then, the other thing I just was going to say is back to your comment on the uranium market, there was mistakes made and will be made in that sector, and we've made them. We have lost money on certain things in that sector, there's no doubt, and our members are well aware of that. And also, we've had great wins, and the great wins have paid for a lot of those mistakes, plus much more. But then also, we've always kept exposure to other segments of the junior natural resource industry. While times in gold were tough, or even times in nickel or cobalt or what have you, yes, there was times when our uranium success helped pay for some of the other waiting game, if you will, with respect to some of these other places that we were exposed because of a certain opportunity that came about. I guess it's just suffice to say that we're not perfect here and we're not here to highlight all the wins, but there's also been losses along the ways, and our members well know what those are because we obviously keep a record of that and it's there for our members to see. And I'm not talking about our audience, I'm talking about our actual Smith Weekly members, which are two different groups. We're not here just to talk up our own book and stuff. And some of those comments you made about some of those specific equities and some of the models that you're looking at in the different stage of these companies, what is the model? Is it just exploration? Is it pre-revenue, as you said? And so I think some of these creative different models, rather than just a one approach, exploration success, we're going to live and die by the drill bit is our plan, or maybe there's other things that can be had. So there are some interesting pieces to what you said about some of these as well. So any comments before we move on?
Well, yeah, I think I'll try to be brief here because I know that I can be a loquacious type sometimes. But no, I mean, a lot of what you said absolutely resonates with me too here, right? I mean, I put hours of research into an interview and I do my best for it to be a one-stop shop intro level conversation, right? But I think that people need to really, really cautious. People need to be cautious. Investors, would-be investors, listeners. If all you're doing is listening to a podcast and reading the slide deck, you're doing yourself a disservice, right? And I think that true research, and I guess that's if there is one thing I am good at, so kind of circling back to where we started here, I think it's my capacity for the patience required to do true due diligence, which is never ending. It's never ending. It takes tens of hours before I make a decision to buy in, and then it's something that I can constantly maintain as along the way, right? And I think you're totally right. Is that these are our day jobs. I kind of took the plunge, and here we are, and like you say, people that have their own full-time day jobs, fully cognizant of the fact that that's not realistic if you're trying to pursue a portfolio of these kind of juniors. So the secret is to find gatekeepers who actually demonstrate you can trust them. And that's kind of easier said than done. But finding people who can help, as you say, kind of from our end, finding consultants or friends in the industry who can help you kind of identify nonsense, but then finding people to help you make sense of things. But I really believe that if you're going to have a large portion of your net worth in an individual company, and you're kind of taking the play, I mean, this is the deep end of the pool, right? This is not buying, a 6,000 company global ETF. This is as risky as it gets. And I think that you have to equip yourselves and shield yourselves through the acquisition of knowledge, right? And I think that constant cyclical nature of research and due diligence is a huge part of that. Part of why I like my job and I love my job is I get to do that over and over again. And like I say, kind of feel a sort of protective nature about retail because we do get fleeced and we do get hoodwinked and fooled. But yeah, I mean, you talk about monetization, paid marketing, which I mean, if I'm being self-deprecating is part of what I do. But like I say, I think I try to be a bit more lofty in my goals than that. But time, expertise, monetization seems kind of silly sometimes, because in what other industry do you have to feel bad about monetizing what you're good at, right? And I think that's so that recognize that paid content, that finding the right one, finding the ones that are quality and doing it for the right reasons, and they aren't just this is maybe a phrase, your followers are not your exit liquidity, right? And I think that's my issue with a lot of paid content, is that they set themselves up as defenders of this and that, and but then they really just they secretly buy, and then they pump and sell into their followers, and that just is just outrageous to me, right? And I can talk about the reasons why I don't do that, or how I avoid that happening, right? But don't necessarily need to. But yeah, being a podcaster, I didn't realize that maybe if I'd known how complicated and difficult and expensive it was going to be, maybe I wouldn't have bothered, right? But kind of the audacity of ignorance, I kind of jumped in. But I mean, it's kind of Dick Van Dyke from Mary Poppins, right? You're walking around with drums and an accordion and a harmonica and cymbals and crap, right? And you just it's challenging, it's tough, it's a lot of money, and it's a lot of expertise. And so again, like, I fully cognizant of the fact that there are bad actors that give us a bad name, and deservedly so, that I take a lot of pride in my work, and I stand by my successes and failures, and I'm not going to feel bad about monetizing something that I think I'm good at, monetizing a skill set that I believe I've developed that can. I mean, honestly, that's part of when I first started. I looked around at the absolute desert that is paid marketing in this sector, and I thought, my lord, if these monkeys can do this, like, I think I can do a better job, right? And that's kind of where I started, right? And so I'm not going to feel bad about it, and kind of unapologetic, and that kind of concept of, if you're good at something, never do it for free, or if you're good at something, then that monetization of those skill sets isn't something to feel guilty for, right?
Yes. And, there is a right way to do it. There's a ethical way to do it, and a straight way to have the integrity. And I think that's where, people fail to notice in the details how we put those protections in place to make sure that we demonstrate that to our various groups that we're involved with, our members, our audience, or what have you. It's pretty straightforward. To me, those things are something that we would do as normal business practice. Other people may not look at it that way, and they have a different set of character principles that we would maybe not agree with. Where
Mm-hmm.
for us, those approaches are pretty cut and dried as to how we handle those things, and can't agree more with a lot of the comments you said there, Matthew, and I appreciate that, and how this is approached. And I think there is a right way to do it. And mention the folks that will use their audience as an exit, or groups within the newsletter industry, which I don't believe either of us are in here at all, just because of the way that we structured our work and our focus areas. We're not even anywhere close to what is deemed the classic newsletter industry, not
Mm-hmm.
anywhere close to that in terms of what we do. And then, also talking about due diligence, talking about sources for information, which obviously all of this is publicly available information. Don't kid yourself. But CDARC, I
Mm.
hate the new model. I mean,
Oh man.
the new website is terrible. Like the next morning, you go back and check it, and you have to like refresh it again and start over because it like times you out. And it's such a clunky piece of crap now. Whereas the old website was amazing. Like it was
Mm-hmm.
just, it worked all the time. You could come back 5 hours later and continue your work on an MD&A analysis. It was so easy to use. It's almost like, hey, why don't you guys put the old site up for people who want to use the old site? And then for the people who want to waste their day dealing with the new site, let them deal with the new site. Like there's always this constant need, like there's always a tweak to the website, or this tweak, or, oh crap, I just updated my phone last night. Oh, another update this morning. I need to update. Oh, Bill Gates and Windows
Yeah.
just notified me. I need to update my Windows program. Crap, didn't I just do that a few hours ago? Like it's just so silly. Like stop, just stop. The old adage of, what, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Mm. I know. Oh man.
So it's like, so yeah, sure, it might be an old clunky car, but if it works, don't mess with it.
Leave it
And so
alone. Yeah.
I swear it's not as productive as it used to be, Matthew, or maybe I'm just getting set in my ways and I don't want to have to go deal with some new system, but I don't see any efficiencies in the new website, to be honest.
It was either designed by somebody who has never ever actually used it to do research, or kind of, I'll find some tinfoil here and wrap it around my head, but or it's a conspiracy to prevent retail from actually doing proper due diligence. Like those kind of like those are the only two options for me. It's just ridiculous. I mean, yeah, you say the old one, designed in 1990s. Sure. Every single news release, every single piece of information the company put out, all on one page. So easy. Control F, 43-101, or technical report, and you can find it. Boom, just right there. Then filter through. The new one, I mean, it's just there are. So I will begrudgingly. Here's two tips that I've developed and learned recently. If people are trying to work their way through, I mean, I actually had a meltdown when they switched over because I thought, well, here goes my whole business. I can't even operate this thing. I mean, have you tried sorting by date, right? I mean, the sorting by date, it's like they took it, put it in a blender, and then just and blended it and put it in, and just vomited it out. I will begrudgingly. They fixed it. So if you actually sort by date, it'll actually be chronological now, which is huge, right? So that's one. And the other one, in terms of navigating, this kind of like navigating this impossible labyrinth that is Cedar Plus, designed, I think, to infuriate and drive insane. But I mean, downloading one file into a zip folder over and over and over again, uh, like I say, I think that it's probably, if burn down a house and kill a small animal kind of thing for me. But no, they you can actually, and this is maybe I'm slow on the uptake, which I never profess that's always a risk with me. But generate URL. If you actually get to the files if you actually find your files, far right hand column, generate URL, and you can avoid the downloading of a zip file for one 3-page doc. A 500 kilobyte news release has to come in a friggin' zip document. Uh, nope. Far right hand column, generate URL, and you can actually just copy it into your web browser, and that has saved me moments of violence here. And that's actually relatively recent. Last couple of weeks, I actually finally picked that one up, and that's saved me a lot of anguish in the last couple of weeks. So there's some hot tips for your audience.
And tip well taken over here as well. Thank you. It's just constantly an update or trying to pitch you something, or these subscription models where maybe tomorrow or a year from now we can't even turn on our own computers that we purchase with our own money because
Oh
we didn't
man,
pay
eh?
the monthly subscription
Yeah.
to the operating system. It's so sick. But to even change the name of the website like CDAR Plus, I mean, really, is it really a plus? Is there really a plus here? Like, and then as far as your tinfoil hat comment, I think it's both incompetence with respect to your first option, and then the second option is yeah, why not make it more difficult to where people just get frustrated or they just waste their days doing nothing on CDAR, and then by the time they get back around to understand how it works, well, your session already timed out.
Yeah, and it's down as of it's. I mean, that my weekends are usually. I mean, you and I talk about this. I'm too busy during the week to kind of get into that downtime research that I really enjoy. But so I spend my weekends kind of flicking through a lot of that quite often, and much to the chagrin of my long-suffering wife sometimes. But it's down. It's down this week again, and this weekend it's gone for 48 hours. So like, good luck and go screw yourself, right? Good luck and go screw yourself, I guess, right? But whatever.
Very true. Maybe we should have folks at CDAR come on and explain why they've done what they've done and why they enjoy making other people's life more difficult. Um, so lots of different work. I mean, even the ASX filing system seems to be even better and easier than
Yeah.
this new Studio Plus stuff. But well, I think we covered quite a bit of things here, and I think you talked generally about what folks should look for, how they can improve their experience as they go through the educational process of the junior natural resource sector. The educational process does result in losses, and the best thing you can
Hmm.
learn is paying that tuition in the terms of losses, and that really is the reality. Because I think you and I can both speak to our experience of when we first came into this sector, how we got to experience that education through losses, which is essentially paying tuition to learn. And so, if you have any other words of experience for some of those new folks that have kind of started into the investment journey in here, because there's always some new generation or new person, have it be in their late teens or in their 20s or even 30s, that comes across the sector, even 40s that comes across the sector for the first time, and they're having to learn. And of course, it's going to take years to really sort that out. We also talked a little bit about maybe some of the things that you look for out there and things that folks should maybe monitor. Any comments there, Matthew? And then we'll wrap up with a few other things before we go.
I guess just seems kind of silly, but just sometimes the best you can do is to break even, or take a 10% loss, right? I think that sometimes people, whether it's, you call it falling in love with the stock or whatever, right? I mean, I caution because, on stop losses, I think that this is such a volatile sector that stop losses can do more harm than good sometimes. And I think maybe it does just come back to you have to have the conviction to. This is tricky because I'm kind of being pulled in multiple directions in my head because to hold these companies long term is to watch value be destroyed through dilution, right? And so you know, unless you have truly picked a winner that is going to, you know, have the accretive value of every round of dilution produce, you know, more value through the drill bit, which is best case scenario but rare. uh, a true long-term hold can be an awfully discouraging thing, unless, and maybe this is maybe a point that I'd say to that, is that this is my personal take, right? But if you're actually content to hold and to undergo the trials and tribulations of the market and to be diluted out your ass from these companies, that even best case, best practice companies who are there for the right reasons are going to dilute. And so, you know, pushing all in, always have another bullet to fire on your core portfolio, I think, right? Because you're going to be diluted and there's going to be days where you're going to be down 50%. And you have to, at that point, have the courage of your convictions and have the informed, data driven understanding of your company to back up why you bought it in the first place. And you have to understand that buying into hype, if you're buying into hype, you are the sucker. You are the liquidity event, right? And so, you know, I think that it's tricky, and it's a tricky balance to have, but to establish and to know. And I think, like you said, it takes kind of those years in the market to kind of hone your sense of these things, because it's not a fact-based true and false sort of thing. It's very much getting a feel for the market, getting a feel for a company and where it is in its own cycle. But if you are chasing hype and you're on the downturn, that's that, you know, there's your classic dump, right? And you are the liquidity event. And so sometimes, like, if you're just chasing hype and chasing momentum, and you're late, which usually is what happens if you're chasing hype, then it's time to just leave. Don't wait for the bounce back. You're down 20%, you know, and you think I'll just wait to break even. You'll be down 80%, right? And there's a couple of tickers, and, you know, first when I can think of some companies where I won't name them because there are people that I like who are still invested in that, and I don't want to. I'll ignore the ticker for now, but, you know, I got out at a 10% loss because I just kind of recognized that I had made a mistake and was chasing hype, and I had a lot of money in there. And, you know, you know, this is kind of me as a Babby's first investment, right? I mean, I had an outright majority of my portfolio in one ticker, and I got out at a 5 or 10% loss, and I lived to fight another day. And sometimes that's the best you can do. And that company is now down 95%. And I know good people, friends of mine who are intelligent and, you know, very informed on that company, who never sold, and so they've just lost their entire net worth. And, you know, you're bleeding heart. I mean, my heart goes out to them. Good people making, just trying to get by and create wealth for them and their family, and they don't fall in love with the stock, and get out, right? If it's a hype driven liquidity event, you are the liquidity event. Get the hell out of Dodge before it's too late, kind of thing.
Very good points, and sad to see and hear of those things because they do happen often. And if folks are trying to level up with respect to their own personal goals, and it's tough because you have governments and policies and little things like it's okay to go into a casino, Matthew, and lose your money at the blackjack table or at the slot machine. That's allowed. We can take your money. But if you're not of a certain financial threshold to walk into the junior natural resource casino, you know, first of all, we're going to stop you at the door, and we don't give you a warning at the normal casinos, but in this particular casino, we have to stop you and say, well, do you have the financial capacity to be able to do this, even though they shouldn't be making those decisions for you anyway? Because
Mm.
maybe you only want to put in $3,000 or $1,000 into an investment on a private placement, but unfortunately, you got to have all these list of rules that you've got to meet to demonstrate that you're a sophisticated professional. But it's okay to go over to that casino and lose your ass that night by midnight after you've gotten halfway into a bottle. And so it's a little bit silly in that sense. While those groups would have you believe that, you know, we're looking out for you, we're trying to protect you, but there's also a gatekeeper thought to that as well. And the casino analogy is perfect for that. But I agree, you have to be very careful. You have to study these things quite a bit before you dive in like that. It doesn't get much more volatile than this. And the ESG score on your smartphone app is not going to save your ass, and nor is the decisions of AI. So might as well just kick that crap out the door. And oh, that carbon score, you could forget about that too. And so, perfect segue here. Um, just to wrap up, why don't we touch on some of these collateral trends that are impacting the natural resource, energy, and extractive industries? Any comments you have here on these things? You may not. Completely okay if you take a pass on a few of these, but the growing influence of NGOs out there on the sector. The push on ESG, talent development, and wisdom transfer to form competent parties in the sector. Obviously, this is an area that we're quite weak. And of course, the underlying control vehicles, like pumping the climate change narrative. Any thoughts on any of those?
Yeah, and this is an interesting one. And so let me try to construct my answer in an articulate way on the fly here. But I will preface this, yeah, and this is like I say, I'm in this sector a bit of an oddball where I do believe in climate change. I do believe that that's a thing. So hopefully I didn't just drive away half your listeners, sort of thing, right? But I think that what the issue is that it has been done. It has been this transition has been fumbled so dramatically by our powers that be, and has been turned in. It has been unnecessarily turned into this divisive thing, right? Where it's become a political issue because it's been done so shittily, right? There's been no that you have on the one hand. I think both that maybe, and I don't know your thoughts on this. We've never spoken on this before, Andrew, but I think in both camps that people on both sides have no understanding of the actual science involved, right? So on the one hand, you have people that are in charge right now that are driving the climate narrative, but their transition is garbage. That there is no transition, right? That's just all they have zero understanding of how essential hydrocarbons are to our way of life, and we would be collapsed into a stone age and have a mega death on our hands, kind of thing, if we were to kind of get rid of oil right now. But on the other hand, I think that out and out denial of the human impact and the Anthropocene sort of era that we are emerging into, I think that if we rephrased it and just said humans have a responsibility for stewardship over our earth and our climate and our environment, and to make sure that we conduct best practice, because it doesn't always just kind of come down to best practice, right? And just doing things in a way that benefits as many people as possible, right? Versus crass or craven self-interest, right? So I think that's a huge failing, in terms of our political leadership and our corporate leadership, where they there is no organized response. It has just sort of turned into a culture war sort of thing, right? It's turned into identity politics when really it takes, big brain technocrats looking generations into the future and not just a 4-year election cycle about like, well, how do we value I mean, I think at this point, and again, maybe I'm out on a limb here, but we've subsidized a lot of our economic growth through environmental destruction, right? And you can just we can debate the nuances of that, but I think that we have subsidized through that, right? And so this responsible, reasonable, and intelligent, and informed, and intentional, and long term, long thinking transition, it just gets turned into just like a 30-second fucking clip. Sorry, you can edit that one out, I guess, right? That turns into a television advertisement to guilt you into this, or it has demonized industries. I mean, what's the replacement for metallurgical coal? What's the replacement for met coal? Do you like iron? I like iron. I think it's a pretty important thing. I say kind of ironically here, Riley, right? But without met coal, we don't have steel, right? And so without these things, I think on the left, if we're going to turn this into a left versus right thing, right, which it doesn't have to be, right. I'm sad that it is, like, it's this identity politics kind of nonsense because of the failure of our leadership. But the left kind of doesn't understand how essential these things are to our lived reality and our lived experiences and in our day-to-day world, right. That's a failure, and it makes me sad because it's, do you want a better world? Like, yeah, if we can do it properly and well managed and not fall prey to kind of political machinations, this is possible, right? Because, and so I guess for me, then it comes down to me, and greenwashing is real. Like, don't get me wrong, I am fully aware. I mean, we need hydrocarbons. The world will die without them. We need mining, and I mean that's an environmentally catastrophic thing, right? I mean, look at Indonesia with nickel. I mean, they're recreating Mordor over there, right? And so, and even a well-managed open pit mine is destructive, right? It is what it is. It's just the reality of the situation, right? But that there are ways to do things properly. And so, this is my take on this: is that, yeah, greenwashing 100% real. Like Rio Tinto, you guys, like, oh, we're revolutionary in our approach to green this, green that. Nothing's changed. It's just you started calling yourself ESG, right? And so I totally get the cynicism around this, but I think that on the flip side, I mean, have your listeners experienced a poisoned river shed? And I think that if you haven't seen the dark side of this industry, then I think that you should go look at those things, right? And understand the very human impact that it has on communities around that, right? And so for me, the buzzwords and all this bullshit that, like I say, is unnecessarily divisive. If I just said, should we try to conduct ourselves according to best practice so that local stakeholders and local shareholders can share in the benefits, that's a fairly high level and generic comment, but like, yeah, like who's going to disagree with that, right? And I think that so we should be promoting best practice, and we should be promoting the minimal amount of destruction required to produce a better world, right? I mean, nickel and all these different things that, and, all these different metals that we need, and we need for our world, and we need for our lifestyle. And I want to see, your developing nations, your third world countries. I want to see their lifestyles and their living quality of life improve. And you get that through industrialization, and you get that through hydrocarbons, and you get that through energy, and you get that through mining, right? I mean, and so I just think that it doesn't have to be such a ridiculous concept. It doesn't have to be such a dirty word, but I think that critical failures in leadership have turned this into a boxing match it didn't have to be. And then also very cynical greenwashing, just slap ESG on it and call it a day and actually do nothing to change your actual behavior. uh, it kind of again produces more resistance because of that, because people rightfully look at that and they're like, well, these guys are just full of shit, they're just bullshitting us, they're just making things up and calling it green, the classic greenwashing. And that produces more resistance, right? Because again, just repeating myself here, so I apologize, but it's just best practice. I want the incredible wealth that the Western world has and it creates through resource exploration and extraction. There are ways that we can make sure that people benefit from that versus there being, some hardcore losers. I mean, look, talk about cobalt. I mean, do we really want child slaves in the DRC making our electric vehicles? Is that really what we want? I mean, are we comfortable with that? I mean, I'm not, right? And so for me, again, this kind of goes back to why I like tier one jurisdictions. There are still going to be mistakes that are made, but you get a nickel cobalt mine in Canada, you can rest assured that that's going to be some of the top tier, highest standards for labor and environmental regulations. Sometimes that's frustrating for sure, and there are ways that we can improve that and streamline that. I know that BC is working on their own kind of mineral tenure claims, and they're working to revolutionize those things. There are ways to improve, but at the end of the day, I mean, we don't have child slaves dying in cobalt mines digging this shit out of the ground by hand, right? So that's kind of again, there's my soapbox. Take with it as you will, right? So
I am aligned with a lot of the things you said, Matthew, and the point out of critical failure at the leadership level speaks to things like abundance, speaks to the quality of people that we have in leadership roles and their misunderstanding of how the real world works. I think all that plays into that critical failure. And then just essentially the good times that have created weak people that we've been able to experience as a result of hard work of others, past generations. And of course, the success also of natural resource extraction and the use of natural resources in a responsible but yet progressive, even more responsible way. Of course, there's going to be bad actors. And you and I both know that doesn't matter what industry we're talking about, or even government, or even anybody on the central planner side or the bureaucratic side, there's always bad actors there. And of course, in these positions of power, you get tempted
mm-hmm.
to want to self-serve yourself, and that the rules don't apply to me, but only to you, and that you're above the law. Plenty of stuff out there about that, and these types of things. And power continues to, in most cases, power does corrupt. It's a very difficult balancing act there as well. With respect to climate change, I completely agree that in the geological context, that climate does change over a significant period of time, and there's no doubt that humans have impact. I mean, crap, I go to the toilet, we take a crap. There's an impact to that. There's an impact to water
Yeah.
resources. There's an impact to a lot of things. Food intake. I'll use Mr. Friedland's. I'll shamelessly take from Robert and just say that, when he says a ham sandwich, most people think a ham sandwich comes out of a refrigerator. I mean, that is to most people probably the thought. When we plug in some type of device into the wall, it's just electricity comes from the wall. But really? I mean, how does that work? electric vehicles? Isn't it just an extension of another footprint that is not really any better than diesel or gasoline potentially or internal combustion engine? Then maybe it's just an extension of another way to consume resources in a way that looks better, that the window dressing is proper,
Mm.
because when you actually look at the components of that electric vehicle versus the inputs to a internal combustion engine today, is it any better? Obviously there's questions surrounding that. And so I think all that kind of plays in. And with the respect to the climate piece again, I'm not convinced that CO2 is the problem here at all. We all know what happens if you take it away. We're not going to be talking. It's an interesting set of push pull forces. The money that has different incentives and motivations, because there's always money behind this, there's always money behind these things. And then the overall thinking that there is a control mechanism, the warning that pops up on your smartphone and says, well, our ESG score is not good enough, so you shouldn't buy this. It's just all silly stuff. The reality is you can't just take it for face value, and that there is an element of control mechanism, Matthew, that's playing into this as well. But you have all these push and pull forces, right, and these different interests. All for making the world be a better place is best of our ability as imperfect human beings, and that there's always generally a better way to probably do something to improve something, but maybe not at the expense of complete forfeiture of sovereignty or freedoms or ability to, I guess, move and not be fully strapped down to something. There's just a lot of different pieces and parts that play into this, and it's very difficult to deal with. And then there's just some things we can't control, right? And that's the other part of it too. No shortage of entertainment, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. I think, and now we're officially, off topic, but I think that I really do decry the collapse of kind of informed public communications and discussion, right, and dialogue, right. That there is a lost opportunity, and I think that you've seen kind of as our society kind of gets pushed into camps that are oppositional in nature, that the ability to discuss and converse and debate in not the sort of in the good faith exchange of ideas debate. I mean, right? I think that we're rapidly losing that, and then that creates a sort of frozen sense of arrest where now can't even we can't even move now, right? That we are unable to respond in any meaningful way because there is no ability for these kind of divergent camps to communicate anymore, right? And so I mean the issue is multifaceted, and it touches on politics and economics and all these different sort of failures overlap with each other to create an extremely divided society that I mean, setting aside global warming and to be upfront, I mean, I think you and I are on different camps on that, and that's okay. That doesn't change my opinion whatsoever what we're talking about here. But I mean, we can set that entire thing aside and talk about, I mean, like responsible water usage and deforestation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right? There's all these other issues that you know don't have to be divisive, don't have to be controversial, and yet they have become so. And we've lost our ability to actually, I mean, many hands make for light lifting, and many thinkers make for best practice ideas or for better ideas. And I kind of the public's the collapse of our ability as a society to actually engage with each other, with people that disagree with us, is I think something I'm rather afraid of in terms of kind of long-term consequences, right? And that's that. But like I say, we're officially. This is not. This is not. I have no notes in terms of preparation for this one, so so we're off topic here now.
I do agree that that inability, which is again goes back to, are we really getting more intelligent, or are we going backwards at this point? And at what point do you stop and say enough? Enough is enough. Because I think ultimately this leads down to most likely be forced, and maybe it doesn't happen in our lifetime, but God forbid our kids, I hope not, but we'll be forced to take a position, because if you don't take a position at some point, you'll have to at some point. And if you don't take a position, it reinforces essentially that narrative that you may not be in favor of progressing, because nobody's standing up to it. So at some point, if everybody takes a position essentially of that, like, I'm not going to make a stand on this, and the next person does. It's like mining in your own backyard, right? Like, you hear the comment, I don't want to mine in my backyard.
Mm.
Uranium mine, copper mine, what have you, don't care. I just don't want to mine in my backyard. Well, that naturally would translate to everybody else saying basically the same thing. So where do you go at the end of that chain of, I don't want this in my backyard? It's almost like the same thing. It's like, I'm not going to take a position on this. And maybe today you can get away with that. If you don't take a position, then it just allows the taking of that position by the opposition to go down that route that you could have maybe stood up to help other people stand up as well. And I think that's another interesting challenge that goes back to your comment about that societal dysfunction, if you will, about being
Mm.
able to have those conversations and people actually doing the work, because a lot of people can take their news from a media outlet and believe it, and they don't actually go and do the work that's underlying the comments that were made by the person that delivered that news and confirm it for themselves. And so, that's the other piece of it as well. But I do think that plays into our industry, and sadly, it has impacted our industry as we've progressed here. Really, I mean, I've seen substantial changes just in the 11 years or so that I've been, actually, it's more than that now, that I've been specifically gearing and heavily focused on natural resource sector changes and developments as, of course, an investor and research person in the sector. Well, with that, anything else you want to add there? But I'm going to leave you with this question to wrap up. And again, thanks for the time and coming on the program. It's been a good chat. But just to wrap up, tell the audience one more time about how they can access your services, talk about the model of that, and then just lastly, how they can follow and contact you.
Yeah, just I mean critical thinking, right? And part of critical thinking is being open minded to people that do not share your perspectives, right? I think there's a big part of that. But no, if we're going to kind of transition to segue into saying goodbye here, no, Matt Mickleborough, Junior Resource Investing. I have a YouTube channel. I think that there's, like I say, I just try to be informed, and I don't pretend to have the slickest graphics, and I don't pretend to be the best, right? But I try to do good work, and I try to constantly be improving myself, and I try to be open about success and failure and learning, and I think, I believe, and I want retail to be, when you come to this sector for wealth generation opportunities. And I mean, this is almost talking about what we were talking about previously, right? And in a world of increasing inequality, where I fear that the collapse of the middle class, that this is one of those things where just to, if you come to this sector because you want to generate wealth, and if you don't equip yourself with the knowledge required to do that, then you're going to have destruction events rather than creation events. Yeah, junior resource investing. I mean, the website, a bit of a housing of it, is juniorresourceinvesting.com, but I'm on Substack. That's where I do my articles, long form articles, and then yeah, YouTube as well, just all under the same name. I avoid, I think that, I mean, again, kind of going back to our previous conversation, that the kind of the societal ADHD we have and the inability to have long form conversations is a symptom of an illness. And so I sometimes get a little sick of Twitter, because I don't understand how you can ever have a meaningful, serious conversation on Twitter. I think, the medium is the message. A good Canadian, Marshall McLuhan, said that, right? And that I think that when you use platforms like Twitter, it encourages divisive trolling and flame wars, and it encourages that kind of the conversations and conduct that you would be ashamed to do in public, because it's kind of a fast hitting, sort of quick hitting, tap your happy drugs into your brain and keep going sort of thing. I think it encourages an unserious level of conversation, and so you won't typically find me on there. I begrudgingly use it as a dissemination mechanism for my content, but no, I think that long form content is so critical, because any idea worth knowing is going to take time, and those quick hit ADHD addiction kind of inducing mechanisms or media does more harm than good.
Great comments, Matthew. Thank you for that. And I just have to joke here, just have a little bit of fun. For the treatment, I'm sure our friends at Pfizer have something to sell you with respect to the treatment. But with respect to the other part about Twitter, you're absolutely right. It is such a good dissemination vehicle. And we see this as well because we have a certain set of policies that are unspoken back here about how we deal with these things. We just had a little bit of an exchange, a little bit of fun the other day. And it's first selective. And then also there's just overall this, okay, you're going to get a couple responses. They're going to be pretty definitive responses. And that'll be the end of it, because we are not going to waste our time at this desk dealing with stupidity, and we really just don't care. And we are going to give it a reasonable amount of respect, but at that point it stops, because you could completely waste your life consumed with these activities, and the vehicles themselves are set up to really cause those types of problems that you mentioned. like long form, like real conversations. And it's just like this podcast. It's not like we had a 15-minute, Matthew's on here for 15 minutes. We're going to jam it all into 15. We don't
Hmm.
have a policy there. We've had short podcasts. We've had super long podcasts that have gone, 3 hours. And so I completely appreciate that and understand where you're coming from. And we completely align with respect to that view. And as much as I'd like to go down and have McDonald's and a Coke every day and stuff and have a Hershey's chocolate bar and all these things, the reality is we have to do it in moderation and we have to be careful about limitations and really the discipline to be able to do that. And it's the same thing with social media. So I appreciate your comments on that. Sorry to go down that rabbit hole.
No, it's obviously a passionate conversation for me too, right? So I appreciate your thoughts absolutely too.
We better get going so we can get on with other things. But great to have this introduction and thank you for taking the time. And Matthew, let's chat soon and keep up the efforts on your side.
Yeah, thanks for the time. I appreciate being on here, and thanks if you made it through whatever this is, 80 minutes or so, 90 minutes, and yeah, even better, kudos to you. Thanks for listening, and yeah, thank you, Andrew.